Hello and welcome to this edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
Just a week to go, and what we will be doing is we will be a day early next week with our free podcast, the one that you don't have to subscribe to, which has the advertising. You can, of course, avoid the advertising if you subscribe. Subscribers will be getting a second edition as well this coming Monday, and we will be getting through lots of things like your questions. And Ivan and myself will be revealing how we go about deciding as to who we're going to vote for. That's all in the subscriber edition. And then next week, we will have an edition available to you on Friday morning as you head to the polls. And we'll be doing a special subscriber edition over the weekend about the results. So there's a lot there, but basically, if you subscribe, you get way more than you get if you don't subscribe. And yes, that's because we're entrepreneurs, Ivan. Is that what we call ourselves?
Indeed.
Okay, but let's get to where we're at in the election campaign. And I suppose I'm going to make a confession to start with. I'm struggling, right? I'll tell you what I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with the enormous amount of information that's out there because of the fact that we have so many parties now. It used to be far simpler in the old days when you had sort of 2.5 parties and, bits and pieces from others around the place. But now we're in a situation whereby every party has a manifesto, and I'm reading that before I'm interviewing the party leaders. And then everyone is doing daily documents being coming out and briefings, and one party is concentrating on one particular aspect of things, another party another, and the stuff every day. And I'm trying to read all of this and I'm trying to distill it to bring what we can to listeners on the last word and for what I'm writing for various newspapers. And I'm sort of overwhelmed, which made me think, if somebody like me who's a professional who does this for a living and enjoys it is finding that the whole thing is sort of like there's too much, what must it be like for the ordinary voter who, by day, instead of reading these things, is going about as working in their supermarket or in their office or on a building site or in manufacturing and only have a limited amount of time that they can give to it? How difficult is it to distill all of this noise?
Well, one of the first principles of marketing and selling is a confused mind does not buy. So this is a real difficulty for the parties insofar as, the backdrop to this is that Irish politics over the last 20 years, we'll say since the Bertie era and so on, has become more fragmented. The 2.5 party system has been replaced with a splintering, particularly on the left-hand side of the House, where you have in no particular order, the Soc Dems and Labour, where there was previously one party, where you've had splinters off of Sinn Féin into, whereby even People Before Profit, because I actually met them, are 3 parties. Rise, the Socialist Party, in fact 4, Solidarity and People Before Profit, which is a kind of umbrella of 3.
And where did the People's Party of Judea, the Judean People's Party fit in?
And then you throw in that, all polls have shown in every constituency, even somewhere like Rathdown, that there is a quota for independence. In that case, it'll be Michael Fleming, who got, over 3,000 votes and stepped aside. And I actually chaired debate of the 8 candidates in the hustings there for Sandyford Business Park, which was mostly about local issues, spur roads off the M50, Junction 14, amenity parks. 26,000 people working there and 6,000 people living there, and a fast-growing area. So a lot of teething problems. And a lot of those issues were actually for Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown Council. But to see them all put through their paces was intriguing in terms of getting a sense of that constituency. But even there, go to Kerry and you have the Healy Rays, and go to, Donegal. I would say Thomas Pringle now is probably going to, having been written off, I would say he'll probably beat the Micah candidate. So throw in all of your fragmentation with, I would say, the prospect of 30 plus independents who again split into regional independence, rural independence, independence for change, independent independence, and the party Independent Ireland.
But isn't it much easier, for example, if you're in America, right? Because we've been focusing here in Ireland on the American elections, and for example, Ivan, stop knocking down all the props in here, please. That's a bit like Simon Harris's prop failure on the lectern.
Indeed.
Ivan has just knocked over the lighting for our YouTube version. Anyway.
No one died in the making of this, I can assure you.
Anyway, just to carry on the point that I was making, in America, you get your presidential election where you decide it's Democrat or Republican. And you do have your House and Senate elections. But again, it's Democrat or Republican. It's a binary choice for people. And I know there are third-party candidates, but they don't get elected in American politics, so they're not really relevant. And I'm not saying we need to have a binary choice in Irish elections, but it's not easy, is it, necessarily?
No, and our electoral PR system facilitates this. And you know what would make it worse? One of the things that the Electoral Commission argued for was that if they could have 6-seat constituencies, I believe that it's much easier for 6 individual entities along the spectrum we spoke about to get 1 each than anyone to get 2. So the more multi-seat constituencies that are 5-seaters and 4-seaters, the more splintering you get. It's very hard for a small party to win in a 3-seater. And then you have the ultimate extreme, which is the UK, which is 1-seat constituencies, whereby everything would be a by-election, even leaving aside the first past the post system, which is actually unfair, where Starmer got 35% of the vote and 55% of the seats. That could never happen under our system.
You see, actually, and maybe as well, because it's actually, I'm always interested in that, a number of people say to me, they still look for clarification on things, and younger voters, like my young adult children, ask me various questions, which I then have to try and give them answers to as to how things work. I mean, the 5, 4 and 3-seaters. I mean, who did the 5-seaters favour? And the reason I ask that is there was an opinion poll T.G. Cahir ran in relation to Mayo, for example. And if you were to take the first preferences and to make assumptions as to how things would transfer, there is the possibility, is there, of 4 government seats, as in 2 for Fianna Fáil, 2 for Fine Gael, 1 for Sinn Féin, assuming that this is an accurate opinion poll. Does that mean that the 5-seaters automatically give better prospects to the incumbent government?
Well, no, because it's easier with just say Sinn Féin to get 1 out of 5 than 1 out of 3. Say they get 18% of the vote, they're guaranteed a seat. So normally the smaller parties would do better, but I have to tell you that, within the kind of hierarchy of the directors of elections for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, they are saying to me, Longford Westmeath, it'll be 2-2-1, and the one can be Boxer or the one can be Sinn Féin. In Clare, they're saying 2 Fine Gael, 2 Fianna Fáil. And I said, hold on a second, that can't be right. There won't be 100% of the seats for parties that have 45% of the vote. So I think that some of these have got carried away with it. But the other thing that factors into this, which is different, the cross transfers between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil will give them both a seat bonus.
Okay. Manifestos. I have read the Fianna Fáil one in full. I read it in full because I had an interview with Micheál Martin on The Last Word on Wednesday. I will have the Sinn Féin one read in full over the weekend because I'm due to interview Mary Lou MacDonald for an hour of radio on Monday or Wednesday, probably Monday. And Simon Harris, I've read part of the Fine Gael manifesto. I will finish it before I speak to him at length on Thursday for an hour on Thursday night's programme. And I've been flicking at bits and pieces of the other manifestos, and the whole thing that strikes me in relation to him is an awful lot of aspirational stuff, very little costing, and very optimistic assumptions about the state of the world, because we tend to operate, I think, at times in an absolute bubble in this country. But there's so much stuff going on around the world at present, and I just take out 3 key areas that I can see which really bring an awful lot of the assumptions in all the manifestos into doubt. One is climate change issues, which we at the moment seem to have almost forgotten about or ignored in this particular election. It's like the Greens have had their turn there out, so climate change isn't really an issue anymore. The second one is Trump's economic policies, and we saw that the guy we've spoken about in this podcast before, Howard Lutnick of Cantor Fitzgerald, is going to be the Commerce Secretary. That raises the potential that we're going to have the tariffs that will be so bad for our exports and could impact on jobs, and which could also mean we have major problems with corporation tax revenues, which is the big thing, given that how much money we depend on for the future in relation to that. And the third one then is the Russia-Ukraine war. Well, the TV debate the other night did a section on Israel and Palestine. Far more relevant to Ireland is Russia and Ukraine, because it's relevant to the amount of refugees that we take from Ukraine, it's relevant to the amount of financial support we have to put into Ukraine, and it's also relevant as to the protection of things like undersea cables from the Russians. All of this is going on, and they're hardly spoken about in the manifestos. And the manifestos assume everything is going to continue in an upward trajectory in the economy, and we're going to have loads of money to spend.
Yeah, this reminds me almost identically of 2007 election, which was just before the crash, 08 to 10. And, at that time, everyone relied on the ESRI were forecasting 5% growth per annum. What they're now assuming, because I've looked at the top line economics of them, and over a 5-year period, they're promising between 50 and 80 billion. Some of that is tax cuts. Fine Gael have promised 7 billion of tax cuts. Fianna Fáil, a lot of money on health and education. Sinn Féin, off the Richter scale, of 79 billion, I counted, of spending commitments between housing, health, education, and so on. So that presupposes actually that there'll be, this is extra spending, 10 billion a year of a surplus based on now figures. So that gets you 5 tens is 50. I think there are no circumstances, even if we don't go into a slump, that the 30 billion in corporation tax can be taken as read, because it's not that income tax or VAT or excise duty or PRSI has gone up. It's really the corporation tax. Now, if you look at, leaving aside, there's a double whammy from Trump. One is the pharma and chemical exports are about 35 billion a year. They are very much, so the IDA...
That's like 70,000 jobs directly from these...
So the IDA presented to the last cabinet and the Department of Finance have done a risk assessment of that trade, how it would be impacted. Now, of course, what Trump wants is that the Americans won't consume less drugs, pharma or chemicals, but they'll actually be made in America. And what they're saying, and what Trump's people are saying is, so say the unit cost of a tablet, we'll just say, is 11 euros. It's made for €1. They're declaring a profit in Ireland to sell it for €10 and then just a €1 margin within the distribution in the States. And so therefore the shifting and the tax planning to put it all in Ireland is really suiting these corporations. So that's what they're after. And I think these...
From an American point of view, you can understand why they would do that, wouldn't
Absolutely. Both in terms of jobs and in terms of tax revenue, it is a no-brainer.
So the only hope we have, and so in this regard, is that it's very difficult to take manufacturing plants and put them across the Atlantic again. It would take a long time for them to be constructed. And then they have issues as to whether they actually have the people who could actually run these plants
and
properly.
you see, but we assumed that it was really to do with the Microsofts, Amazons, Googles, that it was the tech. It's actually not the tech that would be hit by the tariffs, because they tend to be more software and services. It's actually these goods. And I understand the Department of Finance has done this risk assessment. And the way it is this: they're saying that instead of a 10 billion surplus, that we might actually be facing a deficit of 5 to 6 billion a year on our spending commitments.
Which blows up every manifesto spectacularly. I mean, you worked in business, right? Yeah. And I know there'll be one or two people joking, don't talk about Ivan in business and the rest of it. But I would have assumed, and this comes from me as I like to joke, as a party qualified accountant, right?
Okay.
That what you do is, when you're planning, and I know this from experience when I was editor of the Sunday Tribune as well, you make out budgets for the following year and maybe over a 3 to 5 year frame. But you put in what you might call sensitivity analysis. You do, well, if we come 10% under or if we're 10% over, this is how the numbers actually change. And the one thing, I suppose, and you could say the same applies to the government's budget each year, but it definitely applies to the manifestos. There is no sort of on the one hand, on the other hand, or on the third hand. It all makes a set of assumptions, the rosiest ones possible, for making promises, which would suggest there's a lack of reality. And of course, we know what will happen, don't we? The manifestos collide, or they intersect during government formations. So all sorts of things start falling away in different things. And then the economic reality changes, and the manifestos and the programme for government all get forgotten about because you deal with the circumstances
and
as
I
they
think
are.
the question you need to ask those leaders for reassurance on this, if the external economic circumstances change, are all bets off? And I think the answer to that, having spoken to leaders privately, is yes. In other words, there is a kind of general caveat, health warning about these, that if the economic circumstances prevail, these promises won't be made. And I actually think the public have factored that in.
Do you think so? Do you think people have copped on to all of that?
Well, put it like this. It's because all this is cyclical. It all happened before, like the promises made in 2007. Like at that time, there was a Mullingar Accord. Enda Kenny and Pat Rabbitte were leading Fine Gael and Labour, and they were just as competitive as promises as Bertie was. And it all hit the bin when the crash came.
Well, it did, but even before that, I mean, wasn't there also the belief that what people did in 2007 when they voted was that even though you had the ESRI thing that you mentioned and you had all the promises from all the political parties trying to outbid each other, that under the surface, people realised there's something going on here. We've actually hit the peak. The peak was hit around 2005, 2006 in economic growth and house building. And people were getting a little bit worried. And what they did was they voted for what they perceived to be
The
stability.
safety,
And, Bertie had been here. He'd been safe hands on the tiller. Now, you could say he was like a drunken captain in the way that he steered the ship as Taoiseach. But that's for another day. But that they'd actually voted at the time to stay with what they knew rather than risking change. And a large part of this campaign has been the idea of stability is what the two main government parties are claiming they can offer. Experience. And you can see Micheál Martin is definitely going, I am an experienced person line,
Sure.
as against the risk of change. And I suppose, I wonder, will it happen in the last week as well, that it's already happened the last few days, that Fine Gael in particular has been really attacking Sinn Féin's spending plans. Like, as if they're virtuous and that they're only promising 50 billion extra spending, but look at those reckless people who are promising 80 billion, and that they will focus more and more on the lack of experience and the danger as they will try and push it, be it correct or not, that Sinn Féin will not appeal to foreign direct investment.
Well, first of all, I think in favour of the Fine Gael Fianna Fáil thing is that the likelihood is, in terms of what you spoke about fragmentation, they're more likely to be nearer collectively to 90, and therefore that prospect of political stability. But let's be clear, Matt, this is what politicians do. It's their DNA. Take Keir Starmer. Like when he got into power, he suddenly found, my God, there's a 22 billion black hole here. He didn't find that before the election. He wasn't looking for it before the election. And therefore, Rachel Reeves's Chancellor budget in October had 40 billion of austerity measures, cuts or tax increases. Take in Germany, they found a 10 billion fiscal hole. So, like, the truth is, and politicians, this is why people are so cynical about politicians, is politicians are pragmatic. If the circumstances change, what they do changes. And you know what? That's the saviour of this situation, that they'll say that was then and this is now. So I think you really should discount a lot of these promises, not vote on the basis of these promises. But that brings us on to the TV debate.
No, it doesn't. Because what we need to do is take a break. Because if you're not a paid subscriber, the way that this podcast is funded is through advertising. So we take the first of our ad breaks and we'll be back for more after this. Welcome back. So let's go to the TV debates, as Ivan
we'll see the Katie Hannon debate.
Yeah, because there's only been one debate. And actually, I should probably explain, some people, there was a bit of coverage in some of the newspapers about this during the week.
With Sky and Today.
Yeah, because I've been involved in floating an idea that, let me explain the background to this. During the last general election, there were 5 television debates. RT did 2 or 3, maybe it was 2, and DG Cahir did 1. And Pat Kenny did just a leaders debate for the 2 leaders, I think, on Virgin Media. I think it was 2 rather than 3. Maybe Mary Lou was in his. I can't remember. And we did 1.
We did a Rulabulia one with 7
that's
on
one
them.
way of describing it. All right, yeah. But then when I heard a couple of weeks back, just before the election was called, Virgin Media made this announcement that they were scaling back the Tonight Show. And then I heard they weren't doing a debate. And I go, Jesus, that's, surely RT can't be doing the only debates. Surely, sort of with a multiplicity of media available, there should be more than that. And in fairness to Virgin Media, I will say that Colette Fitzpatrick has been doing an outstanding series of individual three leader
And the
interviews.
fact that they're an hour long does allow a level of scrutiny that will never happen in any debate.
No, exactly. And I mean, it's one of the things I'm quite enjoyed doing. I've already done Micheál Martin for an hour of radio, which essentially is about 40 minutes when you have the ad breaks and whatever and stuff. And I will be doing the other leaders. But anyway, getting back to the TV debate, I saw the opportunity that there still could be one done. So I approached Sky Ireland, who put me in touch with Sky News, and we had discussions about the idea of a simulcast between Sky and Today FM, The Last Word, which would have been this Friday. It would have been Friday past by the time many people would hear this, would have been yesterday. But anyway, Friday. And Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin were very much interested in it, and Fine Gael said no. And I didn't make the approach. Sky made the approach in relation to it, and they were talking to people in the party. And by last Friday, it was clear to me Fine Gael were saying no. And even though Sky had sent people over to source a venue and all the rest of it for a three-party debate, which would have been co-hosted by me and a Sky News person, then we were still hopeful. And then Mary Lou McDonald came out with a statement Saturday night attacking Fine Gael for not doing the debate. And then Fine Gael responded.
It was due to be recorded when?
I can give you the
broadcast,
date.
yeah.
Broadcast on Friday, whatever today's date is, Friday the 22nd. We're recording on Friday 22nd. So it would have been on 7 o'clock tonight. And Fine Gael said no. And then Fine Gael said they hadn't been invited. And I'm going, what do you mean they hadn't been invited? And I suppose I put it this way, it's all a bit of semantics, right? Because I suppose you don't issue the invites to the wedding unless you know that the proposal between the parties has been accepted.
Okay.
So it was talks about talks. We were scoping out the possibility of people...
In terms of the length of time and...
Exactly, all that sort of stuff. So when Fine Gael said...
The rules of engagement.
Yeah, no invite. No, we didn't send the specially printed gold embossed card. Your presence is required.
So you're saying Fine Gael were disingenuous?
That you might say that.
No, I'm just asking. Actually, I wasn't involved in this, so I'm just curious about that. Well, that was what we offered, and they weren't available. Okay.
Right? So that's why there is not an alternative to RT debate.
So on the Katie Hannon, which has been the only, first of all, a 10-way debate was, confused mind doesn't buy. It was chaotic. How Joan Collins, to be fair about it, who is clinging onto her seat in South Central, could be identified as a party leader is beyond me. I mean, at least Aintu are running 43 candidates.
She was clinging on at the side of the stage. You were afraid she was so far off to the right that she was going to fall off.
A confused mind doesn't buy. The second thing I say is you buy with your eyes, right? And you're presented with this kind of spread of candidates. Well, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil couldn't buy the choreography that was put in place. First of all, you want to be close to Katie just to say, can I have a word here? You know what I mean? And it's easier to interrupt there when you're right beside her. Secondly, because they decided to do a tag team and not snipe at each other, every issue was right. First of all, so Mary Lou would make a point, Micheál would slam her down, and then over the top would come Simon Harris. So the whole setup, and giving the three more time than the others. Poor Mary Lou was out in the car park in terms of the visual presentation, right out on the fringe. And to be honest with you, I thought it was a debate that enhanced a couple of... See, I told you with Trump, it's the narrative you want to establish. So the Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil narrative of this election is, one, you don't want to risk it for a biscuit. You know what I mean? Trump has come in and all these threats to the economy. Secondly, we have got us through 3 black swan events, and the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know, and we will be able collectively to form a government even if we replace the Greens. The Sinn Féin narrative is 100 years of FFG, time for a change, time for radical change, and people who are fed up with Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, fed up with them. This is the point. Now, the difficulty for the Greens is they're of the government, so they have to fend the government record, and they picked up in 2020. You look at Catherine Martin's vote. She got about 4,000 of that anti-government, anti-establishment vote. Secondly, the party that did most well out of transfers nationwide from Sinn Féin surpluses, really anti-government, was the Greens. I don't see how they're going to get that anti-establishment vote. And secondly, if you're really pro the government, take in so you vote for Neil Richmond, Maeve O'Connell FG, you vote for Shea Brennan because you want the government back. That's your point of view. And we'll say that's 40% of the electorate. Then you're going to look at who's against the government. Will you continue to give all the seats? Like in terms of Carla Kilkenny, 3 Fianna Fáil, 1 Fine Gael. How can Malcolm Noonan get elected and have 5 government TDs? There has to be someone in Tullow and in Castlecomer who would say, I hate the government. And so therefore the Greens are in the middle of the road with heavy traffic, potentially roadkill, that they're neither one thing or another. And if that's the main paradigm by which you're voting, do you want more of the same or do you not?
Few things out of that. First of all, Gavin Riley did a calculation. If you had random selection of people and places on the 10-person panel, he calculated the chances of having Simon Harris and Micheál Martin side by side and right beside Katie Hannon were less than 2.5%.
And throw Mary Lou out in the car park. Apparently they recorded it, though, on some sort of video thing. Katie put it up on social media.
Oh, sorry, just to show that it was legit. It was like having your National Lottery advisor in. Okay, so that's the first thing. That was the second thing, though, is I wondered, did that actually work for them? Because was there not a danger that back, say, Deja Vu 2020, that it created the impression of the establishment party leaders ganging up on Mary Lou McDonald? That there she was, left out on the fringes. They're trying to push her out in the cold. This is the establishment. This is RT, which has just been bailed. This is the conspiracy theory stuff, which has just been bailed out by the government and saved from its own recklessness. And suddenly it's not only putting the two of them beside Katie Hannon, completely legitimately, but the Zen giving them every opportunity. And at one stage, Katie Hannon said to Mary Lou McDonald, no, stop, you've had enough time to speak. And the two lads to her right just kept barrelling in on top of her.
So I get that point, but where Mary Lou was softened in her impact, Into were sniping in with one-liners. Richard Boyd Barrett.
Sorry, Into, that's exactly what you do in a situation like, if you've 10 people. Yeah. I had actually, Pater Tobin had been in with me earlier, and I said to him, have you practiced all your zingers for tonight?
And he wasn't bad, actually.
And actually, he used all the lines he'd used in his leader interview with me earlier that night in The Last Word. And he came in, but he actually loaded them. He had just bang at the right times. And he made a big impact, I would have thought.
But the point is this, that Mary, in the three-way debate, Mary Lou is much more advantaged because two are on one side of the argument, whereas you had Ivana Bacik, you had Richard Boyd Barrett, another good man for, the rebel in the room, and you had Pater Tobin, all on that side. So therefore, for her to dominate that just by virtue of numbers was very difficult. But put it like this, overall, my sense of this is that I have been waiting for a moment which, remember the different elections, and it could be the McDonald's thing or the garbage truck or something. There's been iconic moments. There have been no moments, and there's been no particular hostility developing.
No, hang on. Was there not one moment from that debate? And I have a few points I want to examine more based on what you said in relation to that debate. But was there not a sort of a jaw-dropper moment? And when
the Children's Hospital,
and Simon Harris, when he said, you signed the contract, I didn't.
Yeah.
Continue. I mean, the way he turned
that was his weakest moment.
And said to Katie Hannon, no, I'm not doing it. You continue now. You go off and talk about something else. It was like, what?
Yeah.
That was sort of, my God.
No. I mean, he was being absolutely dancing on the head of a pin there, saying that there was a collective government responsibility, which technically is true. But the line minister brings the brief, brings the aid memoir, brings the contract.
And he was quick enough to claim that he had sent PricewaterhouseCoopers in to do a review as well in relation to how the whole thing was going.
So I'm comparing all this to the most recent European and local elections, and I'm saying what's different. And my expectation was that, I'll tell you why the parties won't do as well. One, higher turnout, young people and disadvantaged areas would turn out, less likely to vote for government. But actually what's happened is, however they've done it, they have really taken the steam out of the migration issue. Like, you don't see... Have you seen tents at 9 o'clock news in this election?
It's a big issue down in Athlone.
Oh, that's the only place. and
a Fianna Fáil candidate who has gone rogue, and Micheál Martin has slapped her down publicly in relation to... And I say she's probably saying, well, this is great publicity for me because I'm getting a thump from my party leader, but I'm doing it on behalf of you, my potential voters.
The situation is what Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have done is, first of all, they've found some way to take the visible difficulty of migration centres off the agenda because they're not signing any more commercial contracts. No mention of the woke agenda at all in terms of carers and families and referendums. They have jettisoned the Green Party when it comes to demonising farmers and all that, saying we got that.
So they're outdoing each other and saying that they'll keep the nitrates derogation.
Absolutely. So therefore, what they have done is they've learned some lessons from June and say, what were the pinch points where people voted independence? But the other thing I'm hearing, and I'm hearing this from Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil on the ground, so they all say they're doing fantastically. Even the Greens, they all tell me, the campaign's going really well, which means the public are really adept at lying and lying barefaced because, and sorry, the other thing that I've learned is this: canvassing has become a disaster. Couple of examples. First of all, only about 1 door in 10 is answered. Secondly, after 7 p.m. in younger estates, the kids are going to bed and they will... I used to canvass up to 9:30 at night, but like the way it'd say, like, where are you going at this hour? You're going to wake the child. And apparently there are Google doorbells now that you can see who's at the door. And once they see it's the politicians, they don't answer. So
I'm sorry. The idea that apparently there's Google doorbells.
Well, we don't have them in Enniscorthy yet. I have a cat and Deirdre, for heaven's sake.
Oh my God. I know we're going to have to get you for Christmas. We'll have to get you out of one of these Ring or Amazon doorbells. To show you how modern technology works.
I was speaking to people who've been out night and day, and they said, first of all, your hours of canvassing are greatly restricted. People don't answer. He said, Ivan, in 10 years' time, door-to-door canvassing will be dead. It's become a glorified leaflet drop.
Well, actually, I think that's really interesting because that goes back even to the American election, and the Democrats were boasting of their ground game and busing people into Pennsylvania. And I think I said it to you in a podcast. I've been listening to stuff where people were saying, well, nobody was answering the door to them. So that means the social media and stuff has become the 21st century way of canvassing. And then it's very interesting to see who's spending the money on that.
Someone sent me a text, a wannabe politician who got in the local election, said, Ivan, would you cover on the podcast how you become a good constituency worker? What you do is, when there's no election on, you're calling every Friday to the doors. They're much more likely to be answered, and you're building a rapport with Mrs. Murphy, for 4 or 5 years. That is the definition.
It's like courting.
Yeah, it's building a personal relationship. So therefore, the people who have done the work on the ground, who are great assiduous constituency workers, don't need... It's only a little refresher by their dispatch envoys, you know what I mean, calling. They're not depending on the warm handshake.
There's a couple of other things from what you said earlier I just want to pick up on. You said about how Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are trying to say that they coped with black swan events and stuff like COVID. I don't know if there's any benefit to them in that. I mean, if you look back to the last 2 general elections, Fine Gael went into 2016, keep the recovery going, wanting praise for basically the electorate said shag off. And
Bertie came out with another, his first zinger he came out with a couple of years ago, if you want to be re-elected to government, have a summer election. And I even noticed this morning, it was -3 when I was my whole form, getting into a shower and everything was more, I was against the world, annoyed at the world. If you know what I mean. I said to hold this election on the 15th of November when we have balmy November. People will get more cranky as time goes by. And don't underestimate, mood is important.
So if that was 2016, 2020, the government got no credit for the Brexit deal. Like people went, that's done, move on. People look forward in elections.
No, Bertie said that. Elections are about the future, not
exactly.
the past.
And this is why what I've been pressing as well party leaders on is for things like, okay, you keep talking about the income supports you gave, like the energy credits, but our electricity bills are still the very highest in the European Union, despite the fact that 1/3 of our energy now comes from renewable sources. we're told that our prices are high because of oil and gas prices. Well, they are, but still our electricity is way ahead of what it costs in continental Europe. So unless
it's the most expensive electricity in Europe.
Are they going to give... there's a Fianna Fáil manifesto, for example, says about a €40 reduction in the PSO levy. €40 ain't going to cut it much when people have become used to the €150 credits and whatever and stuff. But the second thing, which is interesting, is the mantra of Sinn Féin, which is also picked up by the likes of Richard Boyd Barrett, that 100 years of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil is enough with you. And I thought that led to Micheál Martin's strongest intervention the other night, in which he pointed out, well, that's what people had voted for. So you got to appreciate that was the democratic will, but also that the advances the country have made in the last 100 years. And
he had a zinger there. Where were you for the last 100 years? And he listed that they're against you and wound up by saying you were actually murdering Gardaí and soldiers.
Which she didn't address at all. She moved on to a different point.
That was his best intervention all night,
But the interesting point is, I wonder how people do feel about this, because again, do people forget where we had been at in the past and only concentrate on where they're at now and in the future? Because you have things like our life expectancy is now 82. We have, despite all of our problems...
I'd be lucky to make it till the 30th of November, the way I'm...
But we have we have the highest number of people at work that we've ever had. We have the best health outcomes, ironically, I think in the EU are amongst the very best. There's an enormous amount of things that are actually going right. And I know there will be people saying, easy for you to say that, you have it soft, you have it easy, blah, blah, and the rest of it. But there's an awful lot of people who actually possibly do feel that that Ireland is in a better place than it would have been a generation ago and 2 generations ago, that if you compare to where we are, where we were. Sorry, I should just do small things like this. You know, the movie that Cillian Murphy's in, written about the book written by Claire Keegan. I don't know if you've seen it. It's set in Wexford.
I heard it's crap. This is the what's it called again?
Small things like these.
No. Who's the guy? I like him. He used to
Michael
be on the
Harding.
Yeah.
And did you read the piece in full?
No, I didn't. I just saw the headline.
You just saw the headline, and
he said it was crap.
Because he'd been in a bad mood and he didn't get his ice cream when he sat in. If you actually read the piece,
he is a bit of a moaner.
Yeah, it's not actually about the movie at all.
I like him fondly.
So I've seen the movie, and the movie was actually, it hit me in 2 ways, right? One was that, very much the sort of the way we used to treat unmarried mothers. And this was the 1980s, Magdalene laundries and stuff like that. And that is the centre part, and the lack of compassion and the control of the Catholic Church at the time, as recently as the 1980s, at a time when you were done. But the other thing was, I was looking at 1980s Ireland as depicted, and I was going, my God, that could be 1950s Ireland. That... We've actually, it's sort of like how the country looks and our material possessions and how we dress.
The country has been transformed.
The country has been transformed.
Well, the EU has to take some credit for that. FDI and EU. Can I have a few minutes, please, on housing? Because I think it's generally acknowledged in terms of what people are concerned about, both in terms of vox pops and quantitative and qualitative surveys, that housing is the big issue. Coincidentally, I find myself in 2 parallel worlds. One, the punditry and the election and the politics and the constituencies. And separately, next Tuesday, I'm chairing a property summit, right? So at this property summit are, for example, the research director of Savills, Fiona Cormacan, who was with Clúid and is now a business consultant, a board member of the Land LDA, Land Development, Ronan Lyons, right? And so what I do is I do a Zoom call and I say, Ronan, if I asked you no question on Tuesday, what do you want to say? And then I write notes furiously and I just prompt them on that. You do the same. So there was a whole discussion in relation to a thing called PRS. It's the private rented sector. And basically, I could not believe my ears of some of the people that I'm interviewing. Just to tell you about housing. And I'm just going to ask you all these issues, because you're doing debates. Have you heard these issues discussed? A ban was put on co-living and build to rent in this country. So there was 9,000 units built. This was an Owen Murphy thing. In the city centre of Dublin, and to a lesser extent Cork, they've actually been banned. You cannot get planning permission for these.
Two of these have opened within 200 to 300 metres of where I live at present, right? So I'm familiar.
So for the co-living, you could have a gym, you could have a shared kitchen facility. This is for single people in their 20s and 30s before they settle down, and they are tech workers and they're paying an economic rent. That is
there are often people coming in from overseas who don't know the cities, and when they come in, use these as sort of like almost like quasi-hotel locations. Yeah. And probably as expensive, because they can be much more expensive than Owen Murphy actually thought they were going to be. But the idea was that...
But have you heard in any debate, build to rent or co-living stopped? Yeah.
The idea is that they would actually use it as a base for a number of months while they got to know the circumstances and went out and found normal apartments or whatever and stuff. But no, it hasn't been anything that I've
So the second thing is, so we agree now, a target of 60,000 units a year. 400 grand a pop, that's 24 billion. The state will max out 8 or 9 billion. So where is the additional 10 billion plus to come from? So I was speaking to people like Activate Capital, which is part of the NTMA, ISIF and these people. And they raise money and they say, sorry, Ivan, what we're going to say to you next Tuesday is, we're not raising any more money simply because of the rent freeze. And I said, explain that to me. Well, he said, all these London funds and so on, the return they want is 7 to 8% per annum. If they cannot see, and because the rent freeze means 2% or inflation, whichever's the lower. So now that inflation has gone down to 0.7%, they are actually losing money on these. So they're saying, we're not going to build any more of these. So the idea that 10 billion of international funds, pension funds, insurance companies with money to invest in housing, they're going to spend it all in London. And the third thing...
Sorry, I got to say, I did bring that up with Micheál Martin the other night, and he did concede that the state cannot afford to fund all of the housing and that we are going to need that. And you know what? I also had a debate between Owen O'Brien and Pascal Donoghue, and although he plays it down, it's quite clear that Owen O'Brien knows that these institutional funds have to be incentivised in some way.
But his policies are inimical.
But I know at the same time he is saying a rent freeze, and I understand exactly where you're coming from.
And the other issue, this morning we have news front page of the Irish Times that Glenveigh applied for planning permission to build 500 houses outside Dundalk. Again, we want to build up our cities and that. And you know what they decided to do, the councillors, and Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, the whole lot of them, they decided to de-zone the land. So here you have PRS, the whole financial basis of the private rented sector, and zoning, and all the politicians can talk about is targets and no understanding of the people who actually provide the finance, who actually build these houses. It's like I'm actually listening to this property summit. I'm listening to the politicians. It's two parallel universes.
We need to take another break, and when we come back we'll have all the constituency gossip that Ivan has been picking up along the way. We'll talk about things like John McGahon. Lots of stuff to come after this break. Welcome back to the final part of this edition of Paths to Power. Don't forget that if you want loads more, we also have a subscriber edition for the bonus price of just, I think it's around €6 a month, where you get an extra edition every week in which your questions are answered.
What did you make of the John McGahon story during the week?
First of all, right, why did Leo Varadkar make him a senator when he knew he had this major issue hanging over him, right, in relation to a forthcoming case? Or was the civil case, was the criminal case cleared before he became a senator? Had that been dealt with?
I can't remember. Okay. Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
But then the civil case came subsequently. And given that there had been a finding against him in the civil case and that he was 2/3 responsible for the fracas that took place, and maybe fracas is putting it a bit mildly, because it certainly had...
It was a fight.
There was more punches thrown than there were of Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, anyway, put it that way, right? It was a bit more like Katie Taylor and Serrano with the number of punches that were actually thrown. Why did Fine Gael not anticipate that this would be quite legitimately made an issue by their political opponents?
Well, first of all, I made inquiries about this because I'm looking, because there's no dominant issue, I'm looking at, instead of 50% ground war mattering, it could be 70% ground war. And so therefore my feeling about Louth, just to put it in context, I think Sinn Féin hold their 2 seats. They'll replace Imelda Munster with Joanna Byrne. I think that Jed Nash will get elected. I think Kevin Callan will get elected. And it's between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil for a seat. And I think the geography of the Fianna Fáil candidates, Aaron McGeehan, who I had said in another podcast hadn't opened an office in Dundalk because because no TD had ever got elected from the Cooley Peninsula. She sent me an email to say that she had opened it and had a brick thrown through it. But when I checked the date it was opened, it was fairly recent. Okay, but the point I'm making is she has an office in Dundalk, and I accept that.
Can I just suggest something to you, Ivan? When you actually are told things by candidates or party people, check them with somebody else as well before you say them on a podcast or on air.
Everything I say is in good faith. Like, for example, let me correct another thing. Yeah. Who rang me? It was a number that, if a number isn't already dialed into me, I didn't. So this 087.
You're worried about financial scams?
No. A number came up and I said, will I answer? And I said I would. Who was it? A number I hadn't keyed it. Michael McDowell.
All right.
And so Michael McDowell...
I would have thought you had him on speed dial.
No. Michael McDowell rang me up. No, I worked through Samantha, his secretary, okay? Because they always know as much. He said, Ivan, you've been saying a couple of things on the Path to Power podcast which is untrue. And I said, tell me. He said, you have said that my son Hugh is director of elections for James Geoghegan's campaign. Geoghegan's campaign.
Let's even get the names
in
right.
Dublin Bay South. He said, I said, he's not. Okay, he's not. And people are inferring then that I'm supporting Geoghegan. Yeah. He said, and I'm not. Okay? He's staying out of the election and all this kind of good stuff.
Does his son have any role with James?
Well, this is, I said, okay. I said, I'm actually only interested in the truth in the news. I'm happy to correct that, Michael. Was he ever a director of elections? Which would be the next question. Yeah. In other words, a lot of people saying, like in terms of where they live and so on, that it's now fixed, but it was the case previously. He said about 4 elections ago, one of his first local elections. So I pass that on for what it's worth.
I was getting quite a few messages into the programme about you and Mick Wallace after your prediction last week that he was going to move constituency.
No, I said he's made a big mistake. He's made a big mistake.
In going back into his own constituency?
Yeah, he won't get elected in Wexford.
Why not?
Because Verona Murphy and Sinn Féin have eaten that lunch. He hasn't been seen in the constituency for 7 years. And, he always made an issue of the fact that, he wasn't a constituency worker, but he hasn't lived there for some time. And, I make this point, Alan Shatter and other people who go out of politics and go back into politics, things ain't in the same place. But I have to say, in fairness to Mick, I listened to his Southeast Radio interview and so on. He is clearly grieving. And, I think his whole approach was he wanted to leave it to the people of Wexford to decide. In other words, he wouldn't die wondering in terms of would he or would he not have got elected. But I would say he will get less than 4,000 votes.
We will have a podcast next week which will be released to everybody on the morning of the election. Not that we're trying to in any way influence how people might vote or anything like that. It's just for people to get the opportunity to hear more before they decide to go vote if they haven't gone out and voted first thing on Friday morning. But do you think a lot of store will be put in next Tuesday's TV debate, which will be a 3-person debate and which could give... I'm fascinated by watching the way Mary Lou McDonald, I definitely think, has taken a bounce in confidence in the last week or so.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought in the circumstances, as you say, out in the car park in the first debate, dealt with that well and made her point strongly and forcibly. I wonder, is she to a certain degree, though, now she keeps talking about her constituency and her people, whether there's a certain degree of Sinn Féin just trying to consolidate its base rather than what it had been doing in the last couple of years, which was trying to enhance its appeal to get the numbers where it thought it would maybe get 35, 36% of the vote and enough seats where it could dominate and lead a government of some kind in the future, whether they're now just sort of consolidating what they have.
Yeah, and I think that they have a good prospect of getting 30 or more TDs on the basis of there's a residual level of people that are simply against the government. But you take... give you one example.
But that Tuesday night's debate could be that for an awful lot of people, and what I said at the outset of this, that there's so much noise, it's very difficult to get light.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people only focus maybe in the last week. I think a lot of people make up their mind. Whereas in America, people have made up their minds way back between Trump and Harris and Trump and Biden. That in Ireland, the studies show that a lot of people make up their minds in the last week. And that this debate, if Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, which seem to have stopped sniping at each other and are now sniping at the others, if there's a perception that Micheál Martin and Simon Harris gang up on Mary Lou McDonald on Tuesday night, could that play greatly to her benefit? And could it be that Sinn Féin, despite all the difficulties it's had in the last year, and despite what happened in the local and European elections, could find itself able to garner the same first preference vote as it did in 2020?
No, I no, sir. I certainly see, let's be clear. I could bring you to 4 or 5 local authorities that would be full of swing constituencies in Leinster and across the country, where out of 30 or 40 councillors, they only got 1 councillor elected. They simply don't have the infrastructure that they had previously. Secondly,
they didn't need the infrastructure in 2020 to get the vote they got.
Absolutely the case. But, that I think that was an aberration insofar as, and obviously young people, viral voting, they can decide to vote in the last minute. But I just think that the Mary Lou, like someone said to me, Mary Lou is a shadow of her former self in 2020. I don't know if it's true or not, but it was a perception that someone had. She's carrying far more baggage now because we voted for you in 2020, and what have you delivered? Because, they're now an establishment party, and that is a real difficulty for them. I've spoken previously about the migration issue, how that has simply moved. Like, everyone who is potential far right was previously a Sinn Féin voter, and that is not coming back to them. So you add up that, and you add up the fragmentation between the Soc Dem, Labour, Ain 2 and People Before Profit, also, with a left-wing message, it's very hard for her to punch through. So maybe Tuesday night will be the making of her, but I just don't think her product and her offerings in the same place. And I also think on housing, that actually housing is not homogeneous. Like, one of the things I learned from this property conference, that of all houses built, only 10% is social housing. And that does need to be got up to 20% to really make an impact on homelessness. So the point is this. Some people are interested in the Help to Buy, their over 90 grand household income. Some people are interested in affordable housing. Some people are interested in state housing and so on. So people know this is a little bit more complex, and I'm telling you that they're not even scratching the surface of planning reform and money issues that are actually at the heart of this. But I actually think a simplistic message on housing is not going to get the same traction it got in 2020.
Okay, look, why don't we leave it there? If you want more, well, we have a subscriber edition which will be available to subscribers to hear on Monday morning. And we have lots of things. We've got lots of brilliant questions in from you, which we will address in that. And also, Ivan and myself will be giving a little bit of detail on how we intend to vote in the forthcoming
early and
general
often,
election.
I always say.
There'll be a bit more detailed information than that when we get to the subscriber podcast. But for now, thank you very much from me, Matt Cooper.
And from me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for being with us, and until the next time.